Many of you may know or not know that he's from Tarkio, Missouri, and it's my understanding he had 3 children go to his public schools there. And so just a couple of years ago, he started representing Northeast Missouri, and it's nice to have a public school supporter come and view our schools. So thank you very much for coming today. Appreciate it.
I appreciate the crowd and folks coming out. We're on one of our district work periods. It's actually the Easter break work period, which I get the opportunity to move around the district. Now that it's 36 counties altogether, it takes a little while to get all the way around the district and try to hit every single county as much as we can, which is what we're trying to do. But it's great to be in Hannibal. I got to see the facility, what an awesome facility, and hats off to the program. You guys are doing some pretty innovative things, and I think it's really, really neat. So it's always fun to see stuff like this, and things that work, and things that are happening throughout the district. What I'm doing, moving around, is just talking about some education issues. I was trying to pick issues that are important and things that are coming up. It's been interesting over the past few years. There hasn't been a whole lot of education initiatives come out of Washington. That's a little bit good and a little bit bad. You always got to worry about anything coming out of Washington when it comes to education. The vast majority of education funding comes locally and through the states. The federal government funds about where are you all at? 9% right in there. Unfortunately, a lot of regulation comes from the federal government when it comes to how we teach, what happens in the school, this sort of thing. Bottom line is we're trying to extract, at least some of us are, as much of the federal government out of the process as we can. We had the No Child Left Behind bill several years ago. There's been several things that I've tried to do to change that over time. We haven't seen a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is what it is. For years, I was working to do 3 things. One of those things was to try to remove schools from the failed list if they missed 1 or 2 criteria. A school that does that is not a failed school. It's just missed 1 or 2 criteria. We were actually able to do that. I added that provision into a bill we passed last summer, which was the Student Success Bill, which did a little bit of education stuff. I was actually able to get that provision in there, so that's a good thing. Another area that I was trying to change when it came to No Child Left Behind was taking children that had an IEP off the grid. The problem was No Child Left Behind was kind of in conflict with kids that had an individual education plan. You already have a system of measure for that child that's been worked out with the school district and the parents, the teachers, all involved. There's no reason to have these 2 systems out there basically in conflict with each other. I haven't ever been able to get that done. The 3rd thing that I've always been working on as well is trying to measure a student's success as they move through the process. There's nothing that I hate worse, particularly coming from where I come from, having come from a very small school where I grew up. When you measure this year's class to say last year's class or the next year's class, in smaller schools you have a huge amount of diversity sometimes when it comes to one year to the next. Great big large school districts like maybe in St. Louis or Kansas City that averages out and you get a better understanding, I guess, but in smaller schools it just doesn't work. And there's no reason why we couldn't track that student to see what their progress was as an individual, not as one class. This year's 4th grade class, last year's 4th grade class. Those are the things that I've been working on for a long time. We never have had that education reauthorization. It's never come through. We did pass what I mentioned earlier, which was the Student Success Bill last year. I ultimately did not end up supporting that bill for the simple reason that there was an amendment that was added to it later that allowed Title I funds to be able to follow a student to charter schools or public schools. I've always been against school vouchers. I continue to be against school vouchers, and I kind of felt like that was the foot under the foot in the door, so to speak, when it came to vouchers, so I didn't support it for that reason. But there were a few good things in the bill that are obviously worth moving forward. It's passed the House, has gone nowhere in the Senate. In fact, I don't think there's any education initiative that's passed through the Senate. So where are we right now? We're still trying to get a reauthorization. We're dealing with this Common Core issue that the U.S. Department of Education has put out. Unfortunately, Missouri has opted in. That creates a real problem. In fact, 46 governors around the country have opted into it, which kind of takes it out of our hands. But if we can reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education bill, we would be able to, I think, at least of what's going on, at least in a nutshell, in terms of education. You watched it, not a tremendous amount happening. A few things that always come up in the budget process, Perkins dollars being one, which I'm a huge supporter of, belong to the process that supports career and technical education programs. I think they're very important, particularly in our rural areas, very important to a lot of students that need those secondary education opportunities. But ideas, thoughts, concerns, things I should be working on, specifically, throw it out. Because I can ramble on all day long.
Go ahead.
Well, a couple of issues for rural folks. One of them, you have both Missouri and Mississippi River in your district, probably the only Congressman that does. And WRDA bill is in discussion in the Senate and House. It's been passed, but there's never been any funding. We're going to see money for that. That creates thousands of jobs.
And the biggest problem with WRDA right now, and I kind of back up and explain WRDA. WRDA is the Water Resources Bill that we passed. Every so often it's a reauthorization, and it's the project bill basically for all of our inland waterway projects. I have an interesting perspective on it, as you stated, because I represent both the Missouri River, all the counties down in Kansas City, on the west side of the state, and I represent the Mississippi River, all the counties from the Iowa line almost to St. Louis. So I need to deal with the Corps of Engineers on this side of the state, the Corps of Engineers on that side of the state. And it's an interesting process, to say the least. Different priorities, different ideas on management of the river. Well, in the past, WRDA has always been a project bill. That's where Congress decides on how the money, water resources bills get moved along, get funded, get passed. And since the earmark ban has gone into effect, there is no opportunity now for Congress to be able to insert dollars. It comes down to the administration, which they'll use the Corps of Engineers to make that decision. Same thing with the highway bill, and I'll throw that in there. The highway bill is a project bill. It's an infrastructure bill. The money's going to get spent out of the highway trust fund or your gas tax dollars. No longer can Congress make the decision on how that money is spent. The administration will make the decision on how that money is spent. So we're trying to change this earmark ban to include projects that are supposed to be a project bill. You can't pass a project bill, a reauthorization bill, if you don't have projects in it. And I think the Congress ought to have that authority rather than the administration. So think about it. I would rather see members make a determination on how the money that's allocated to their district is going to be spent, simply because then it's going to be allocated around the country. If you have the U.S. Department of Transportation making that determination, where do you think the money's going to go? It's going to go to the population centers. That's what's going to end, not to the rural districts like mine. So we got to fix, and we're trying to actively fix. There's a group I was trying to actively change the way that's done. Now, WRDA right now is in conference, trying to work out some of the issues. There's still a lot of projects in there. Funding will go determined by the Corps of Engineers, and that can be habitat reclamation as opposed to rocks and dams, infrastructure, or updating their determination, which is frustrating. The good news is, at least on the Mississippi side, they did it a little bit better than on the Missouri River side. The Missouri River has much different priority. They have a much different way of determining the priorities, maybe I should say, than you do on Mississippi is extraordinary navigation on the residents side. Missouri is how searching on these turn, finding both of them. Some of the yes, ma'am.
I know Blaine Lukemeyer had introduced some legislation to strengthen FERPA because of the regulatory changes. Could you, it's about privacy of education data.
Is that within the U.S. Department of
Yes.
Elementary and Secondary?
Yes.
And
The regulations were revised in 2011 to weaken privacy rights. And I just want to know what your position was on that and the status of that.
I don't know the status. I know I just signed on the bill that Blaine introduced in terms of the education. When it came to me and asked if I could help with it, and I said, we're going to sit down and these ways to do. And I'll Department of Education. We're trying to bring all of this under one umbrella. You know, and it goes back to, folks, listen, the states are responsible for our education, not the federal government. The number one priority in the state constitution is the education of our children. It should be a state decision. It should be state control, and for that matter, come right on down to local school board. Not the federal government. The federal government's number one priority is national defense. That's the number one priority. So it's it goes down to this trying to pull, and we're seeing that this is congressional action, where this is the U.S. Department of Education trying to pull it as much as they can, try to understand it. And I know that's the bill that's and the reason for that is yes, they use action. I didn't know there's so many acronyms.
One question that several of us met recently with your assistant parent out for early childhood programs and home visitation and funding for that. I know Head Start played a role in that. I know there's some other programs through the National Parents and Teachers Center that play a role. Where do you see the progress of those things, the funding issues, and home visitation type programs?
Funding issues are a challenge for everything out there. It doesn't matter if it's agriculture or education or defense or whatever the case may be. So that'll be a challenge for a while until we get the budget deficit under control. But we continue to try to fund those things that make a difference. And it's a well-known fact that early childhood programs make a huge difference in a child's being. And I've kind of followed even when my kids were in the my wife and I were in the Parents as Teachers program back when they were a lot younger than they still were. Regardless, I know it was an educational experience for me. But you can see a lot of kids that really needed the structure, really needed that interaction. I don't foresee there being any problem with support. There's support nationwide for all the early childhood programs that are out there. It just comes down to funding and funding priorities. You'll see increases. It's whether or not the increases are as much as you may like them to be. The frustrating part is dealing with the budget deficit, there's just this huge spending problem, except for the spending priorities are completely out of whack. We see increases in revenue every year. It's not a revenue problem. It's a spending problem. And you have to readjust those spending priorities. And we'd love to see money go to those programs that work in other places, the programs that are problems. Until, as you know, you have nice.
And if I understand right, you're on the Economic Development Committee.
The night, there's a caucus.
Okay.
I'm not on the committee.
And what we like to just say as early childhood people is, we help with economic development. If you have families that have good skills and their children are well educated and they do good jobs, we are a plus for economic development. More education makes a difference in economic development.
My kids are, so I got a daughter that's now a second-year law student, and her boyfriend just came and asked me to be engaged to her, so that was it. I had to work through that process. Then I got a son that's a junior in college, and then a daughter that's a junior in high school, so they've grown up. Turn around, they're grown up. It's frustrating to me. Very frustrating. But I may have, dare I say, grandchildren.
Sam, I may be wrong on this, but the House appropriates federal dollars to the various agencies, federal agencies, like the Department of Education, and then they dole it out to the states through the various programs. But like the Department of Education, once you all appropriate funds, do they have to go for specific programs out of the Department of Education to the states, or can the Department of Education slice that pie the way they want to as far as providing education programs like parents and teachers, elementary, secondary education, the various programs that we have out here. I mean, it seems to me you all do have leverage in the appropriation process of how the Department of Education spends those dollars.
There's a lot of, for the most part, they're somewhat tied, but by the same token, I'll kind of walk through the budget process and why that's a problem now with how those dollars are allocated. The appropriations process starts in the House and then goes to the Senate. The House and the Senate have to agree on. First, you have a budget, which there is no budget, and then you have the appropriations bills that fill in on the spending priorities. The Senate hasn't passed a budget since Harry Reid has been there. The last time the Senate passed a budget was, we didn't have iPads. That's how long ago it was. That's by design. Because if there's no budget between the House and the Senate, the House has always passed a budget. We just recently passed the Ryan budget. There was 2 or 3 other budget proposals that were out there, but it was the one that ultimately passed. But if the Senate doesn't come to the table, it doesn't agree on a budget, then it's wide open. It's absolutely wide open. And again, that's by design. Because then what happens is mandatory spending continues to, whatever the demand is or the draw is. For instance, if Medicaid demands a 25% increase, people will get it because there is no opportunity like we have here to scale back that increase, to scale it back and try to bring it into more realistic terms. So it creates a problem. And then what happens is, so money continues through a continuing resolution, and that's what the word for it is called, to continue funding at least until something is done. Well, as long as there is no budget and there's no agreement on appropriations, and that money goes straight to the agencies, and then the agencies divvy it out. Now, we did have an attempt, for instance, in No Child Left Behind, one of the proposals, and the way it ended up was about half as good as I had hoped. But one of the things that I tried to do was make sure that all non-Title I funds, and I had an amendment to do this, all non-Title I funds go to a school district. The school district has complete authority to decide how that money is going to be spent. We ended up with 50%. Basically, what it said was 50% of all non-Title I funds, the school district can decide. Again, it should have been all of it. The school district should have that latitude. We couldn't even touch Title I. It still has to have a certain amount of money has to go to Title I. Have a certain amount of money that has to go to specific programs that are laid out. Sometimes those priorities don't even work for a school district. Sometimes school districts, tailor their programs completely different, but they have to work within the structure of the federal government. That's the frustrating part. So there is some very specific guidelines, but there's still a lot of latitude the way the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education throws or divvies that money out and gets creative on how they can put that money out and what shoestring or what parameters they can put on it to make sure it's spent the way it is. And that's not this administration, it's every administration does that. And it's not so much the administration, it's the people within DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, U.S. Department of Education, those bureaucrats that want to, and they're long-term individuals that want to direct, and Common Core is a perfect example of that. It's risen up out of the Department of Education and been forced upon. And I don't like the way they intimidated states into signing on to that, but it's the way the bureaucrats are working. But they have ways of being able to say, you may be able to spend this money the way you think, but this is how it ought to be spent. They just put it under strings on it to make sure it goes in that direction. So there's a lot of manipulation. Even though the law may state something, there's a lot of manipulation. But unfortunately, with no budget, we can't direct money the way I would like to be able to direct money in terms of the people that represent, the people that are held accountable, the people that are elected to make those decisions. Instead, it's been passed to bureaucrats, unfortunately. But there are some specific things out there, and even with that proposal that we were able to do with non-Title I funds, now that there's no reauthorization on it, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, it's kind of, it's a common unfortunately. I don't know if I answered your question. Take my hands.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, even though you do get the reauthorization, do you think you can meet the Common Core with all the muscling and the lean and all that going on, and everybody else on that? You think you can meet them
override Common Core. Common Core is a congressional driven or law driven statutory driven initiative.
They can pull money, see, they can pull money. They can, like you said, even though it's written like this, they can say, well, we just won't give you that money.
Well, they won't be able to if the Education Act is reauthorized out of the law and the law of land, and it will have to be followed. So what it will do is completely override Common Core initiative.
Do you think they'll let you get that over?
Well, maybe I'll do it, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, that you already gave the start. Looks like.
We're trying.
Yeah, if you keep on trying, because, you know,
We're trying.
that we'll get this over anywhere they can, look like.
Well, and again, the states, and that's what's frustrating too, is the states have all jumped on board.
Yeah.
And I'm a little surprised, the state's willing to give up that authority that they have in making determination on their curriculum. And now, you've also got this overriding problem with, you got SAT tests and ACT tests, now they're going to be rewriting as a result of what the Common Core standards are. So now that's an intimidation move too, because, those kids, you don't want them to be unprepared for those college entrance exams. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. Yes, ma'am.
We know through working with Head Start and parents and teachers that a great deal of success early childhood is because we have families. We can make some great strides in children with that, with the families not continue. The children want to be supported as much as they're doing for the elementary and secondary grades. When there's been discussions about the authorization from the secondary, has that been part of the discussion or about considered?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure, at least in the, within the committee, I don't sit on the education committee. So I can't really address whether or not they brought it up. I think it's a well-known fact that family involvement is key to all of those programs. It's absolutely key to it, in getting those families, as much engaged as possible. And the unfortunate part, it's kind of a catch-22, and I guess now I'm going off on a side note, but, as the schools are being looked at, the organizations do more and more and more with the children, it's almost like taking over some of those parenting roles, and it's allowing some parents not to be able to be as involved. Now, but the problem with that is, though, if you back off trying to enforce that, then you have children that suffer from not receiving some of those opportunities. But I think it's a general well-known fact that family involvement is vitally important. That's what we were talking about earlier with what you all are doing with the prison. That's fantastic. And I think that's all. And I have no idea that this is the only place. It needs to be copied all over the country. All over the country. Because that helps both ways.
I remember when Mrs. James sent us out to sell it, and they wanted to build the building. She said, Mrs. James called us all in, and I said, what do you want from us? She said, I want you to sell it to your community. Yes, and they did. Yes. And Mrs. James has got us all started. She said, now buy out on mission.
Sounds like it's going to be full next year. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. We're going to, I'm going to keep moving around the district. I'm going to be in tomorrow. I go back to the west side of the district, and we've been the last 2 days on the east side. I've got events in Kansas City, St. Joe, and it's a big district. It's a big district. But anyway, if you got anything, don't hesitate to call me. I'm in the phone book. I'm home every week. Tarkio's my home. I decided when I first got elected, you kind of go through the process of trying to decide if you, and a lot of members go through this, do you move your family to Washington, or do you keep your family in your hometown? And just the school district situation alone is enough to help me keep your family in Tarkio and going to school in Tarkio. But really it comes down to, you talk to those members that lived in D.C., and you try to find out how often they get back to the district, and you can just see it in their voice, because because they didn't want to leave the family and come back here. Well, I kind of thought, I want it to be a chore to have to go to Washington DC. I want it to be a chore to have to go home. And so I live here and I commute every week, so I'm in district every week. But
Thank goodness you have an airplane that you can get around.
exactly, it's lots of air.
36 counties.
But thank you all for coming out and just give me a call if you got anything, or the Hannibal office, St. Joe office, Kansas City office.